This video clip I'm about to share is from the Venice Neighborhood City Council meeting. I'm gonna have a link down below in the description from the Zoom meeting. But I wanted to share what the Reverend had to say at this meeting. It's definitely worth the listen, and it'll give you good insight as to what's going on.
Let's go into the presentation. Andrew Bales, truly appreciate you joining us tonight. This will be a real informative, and Brian Ulf is going to take over from there as far as running the questioning, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Frank.
Andy, I'm going to do an hour introduction because I'm cutting it in half. So give me a couple minutes and thank everybody for being here tonight. And thank you for kindly agreeing to come on to our homeless committee. I think we're going to have a large crowd tonight, and we obviously look forward to your message. Let me tell you a little bit about Andy. The Reverend Andy Bales is the CEO of the Union Rescue Mission on Skid Row and is responsible for the oversight of URM's 5 core divisions. Andy and his senior leadership team inspire excellence, professionalism, and fellowship while embracing people who are experiencing homeless with the love of Christ. Andy brings over 31 years of experience in community outreach, and his service to his friends experiencing homeless, as Andy puts it, as he leads the Union Rescue Mission into the new era of unique and innovative services for Los Angeles' Skid Row community. Andy's vision for the future of the Union Rescue Mission is to keep the mission's long and distinguished history of service to the city of Los Angeles, established in 1891. URM has always served the most desperate men, women, and children of the community. As CEO, Andy has had a pivotal role in reshaping hospitals and government policies related to the dumping of homeless patients from hospitals onto the streets of Skid Row. Andy's present focus is organizing and working with community partners to address the epidemic of the homelessness in Los Angeles. And I might add that he's also played a key role in sharing his profound knowledge and daily personal experiences with the LA Alliance and federal judge David Carter. Hoping that we'll hear some more of that potentially later. In researching Andy, I found probably 4 or 5 pages of all the honors and awards that have been disposed on him for community service. Let me just give you a couple of them, including he was named as the 930th point of light by President George Bush in 1992. He received the NAACP Community Service Award. He was declared a Treasure of LA by the Central City Association in 2017. He has been featured just an amazing amount of times on CBS 60 Minutes, NBC Dateline, CNN, and so many different social media outlets. Andy has also, and this is staggering, raised well over $400 million for his amazing work to assist his friends experiencing homelessness. The Union Rescue Mission, this is really cool. The Union Rescue Mission is listed in the top 100 brands at number 94 for all national charities. When you consider that there's over 1.1 million registered nonprofits in the US, the fact that the Union Rescue Mission was listed 94th is incredible. Andy's personal participation in embracing social media opportunities, similar to what he's doing for us tonight, has been credited for the mission's success in receiving this distinction. Andy and his wife, Bonnie, who is a nurse, have 6 grown children, and they delight in their 7 grandchildren. And in his spare time, Andy and Bonnie have also welcomed over 25 children in foster care to be alongside their children. Without further ado, please welcome the Treasurer of LA and the CEO of the Union Rescue Mission, Reverend Andy Bales. Andy, thanks so much, my friend, for joining us.
Thank you, Brian, and everyone. I'm honored to join you and praying all day. How can I best assist you and offer you hope and some steps moving forward as we both are in kind of a working in a neighborhood that is, to me, seems far past the tipping point and in real danger. Skid Row, as you know, is the biggest man-made disaster in the United States. It's been voted by Forbes magazine recently as the number one most dangerous neighborhood in the United States, and it is adjacent to numbers 2 and 3 in the top 10. So there's no doubt Skid Row is in trouble. There has been some real hope with Judge Carter and others, but even that is waning a little bit, and I'll talk to you more about that in a little bit. But I don't know if I'm considered a treasure of LA anymore, Brian, because I've been battling with the LA Times and with the LA City and LA County and calling them out for attacking the judge and attacking anybody that goes against the deadly status quo, as I call it, that is currently happening both in downtown LA, Skid Row, now in Venice. And I'm just here to help in any way I can. So maybe you can ask me some pointed questions and I can share more.
Well, Andy, thank you for that that introduction and your work. Again, it's profound. I've known you for many years when I was down in Skid Row with the Weingart Center Association, and your dedication is amazing. You know, I'd really like to hear your personal experience as it relates to what you see every day down there on Skid Row, and really how you see what's going to happen with the injunction. How are they possibly going to house that many people, assuming the number is around 4,500? How is that going to be taken down there? How do you think that's going to happen? And then the follow-up is, if it can happen there, you know, second to Skid Row, Venice now at over 3,000 potential people, how can we get Judge Carter to come to Venice, you know, and help us here, the desperation that our residents are in? And again, it's because you're in an industrial area. We have this problem within our residential area. So give it a couple minutes on that.
Let me answer that first question, because I think that one will bring you the most hope. So I've been working alongside a pro bono lawyer. I stayed out of the Alliance lawsuit at first. My board asked me to stay out of it, but then we were approached by a pro bono lawyer, and he asked me to write an amicus brief. And so I wrote an amicus brief, which shared history that showed LA County and LA City over the years, and I've witnessed it, have practiced a longstanding corralling and containment policy of gathering up everybody who's troubled, everybody who's struggling with homelessness, people who are mentally ill, and gathering them up through the county and bringing them to the streets of Skid Row and dumping them off. And that was true of County Hospital, other hospitals. That's why I helped cost area hospitals $30 million in lawsuits for dumping patients on Skid Row. It helped create some of the recuperative care that sprung up around the county since then. With Commander Andy Smith in 2005, he caught the sheriff's department dropping off people who were devastated by homelessness, even as they tried to create storage areas for people who were homeless. You could do that on Skid Row, but you couldn't do it anywhere else. So even recently, LA County and LA City have shown a tendency to corral and contain with their policies. When we tried to open up Hope Gardens Family Center 16 years ago, the most powerful county supervisor at the time fought us tooth and nail, along with a neighborhood group. We couldn't even get on the agenda to have our move considered. Finally, the planning and zoning commissioner, planning and zoning department fellow who put us on the agenda, he had to retire early, kind of shame, and move out of state because he faced retribution for even allowing us on the docket. So I just helped share what I had seen, what I had experienced on Skid Row, and that helped form the outline for the 110-page injunction that Judge Carter used. And I had great hopes. I mean, I've been praying for Judge Carter before I ever knew him. I gave him a tour of Skid Row. I gave him a tour from under the freeway bridges. We've become friends, not talking about the case, but just sharing scripture and devotions with him every morning and encouraging him. And I really felt he was an answer to prayer, because how in the world, you know, you come here to end Skid Row as we know it. You come here to decentralize Skid Row and regionalize services. And here you have a judge show up and order that. He ordered a roof over everybody's heads, women and children first, and then the men in the next, months before October. And I can tell you one way you can't do it is if you're the city. You can't do it if you appeal the decision, right? I mean, he gave an order to get a roof over everybody's heads, and LA City and LA County have appealed the order because they said they don't have time to put a roof over everybody's heads. Now tell me how disingenuous that is to say we don't have time to accomplish that. Meanwhile, we're going to appeal for 6 months. We're going to take it to the Ninth Circuit Court, and we're going to take it to the Supreme Court if we have to. So LA Times editorial board has gone after the judge from the beginning. So I've tried to provide him, a former soldier, a Marine in Vietnam, a member of the Walking Dead, the most harmed troop in the history of Vietnam. I've tried to provide him missile fire by going after the LA Times and LA City and LA County, and at times atomic bombs to help him, because there's a fellow, an activist downtown, who called me a racist, and a racist with a capital R, and a rich old white man, at the same time that his wife is getting paid over $7 million developer's fee for your nearby neighborhood housing for people devastated by homelessness at nearly $1 million per unit. So I'm not sure how he can get away with calling me a rich old white man. And he was attacking me on Twitter, something fierce, till I brought that up, and then it kind of quieted down. So once in a while, dropping an atomic bomb to go after them. But here's where it is right now. It looked like the judge's order is going to get stopped or taken to the Ninth Circuit Court. And so a lawyer buddy told me that, hey, we're going to do this settlement. This settlement is going to provide tens of thousands of units of housing for the whole county. I read it. It was outstanding. It's going to provide hundreds of acres of land to help people. It's going to provide mental health care. It's going to provide addiction recovery care. You can imagine how excited I was, because they said the settlement was imminent. But the LA city attorney, the LA county attorney are fighting it with everything they've got. They're not even letting the city councilman see it, the settlement offer. They're not even letting the county supervisors see it. They're fighting it every step of the way. Somehow, some way, this lawyer has gotten some of the city council and some of the county supervisors to take a look at it. And he's also, he and I and others convinced some of the main groups who provide permanent supportive housing, the very expensive, slow to develop permanent supportive housing, to look at it and to stand for it and stand with it. So that's a remarkable change. And he invited me. When I reached out to him tonight, I said, what kind of hope can I offer? They said, if you'd like to join him officially in pushing for that settlement, he would like to talk to you. And it's pro bono. I tried to sell my house and pay him the other day because I wanted this to go to the Supreme Court, because I think the Supreme Court might have some sense and some logical common sense about how important it is not to leave that many people on the streets when there's 5 people dying per day from the devastation of homelessness. By far, the biggest cause is overdose deaths to meth and fentanyl. And Brian, we've been calling for a movement to recovery,
Yes, yeah.
but not where the city and the county are going, right?
Can you touch on housing first? And you know, it's a house, but no accountability. You can go up, you can drink in your room, you don't have to take your meds, you don't have to do anything. And so,
Yeah,
these,
let
I mean,
me tell you the honest truth. We are trying to add a building at our Hope Gardens Family Center for families with children. We received this paperwork from the county that said, hey, you won't even have to appear before the neighborhood council if you'll agree not to intervene in any way in alcohol and drug use. And I said, not interested. Why in the world would we want alcohol and drugs to flow freely in a apartment building full of women with children? And I'm telling you, it's more than you have to let people go and do what they want to do in their apartment. You are required, if you take money from the city and the county, to absolutely not intervene in any way. Perchance you make somebody feel guilty about how their alcohol and drugs and behavior are spilling over into the community. And I want to tell you a true story. You're not going to believe it, but I'll tell you a true story. Dr. Drew Pinsky and I, we made a video of a tour of Skid Row. We wanted the president to see how bad it was. I just tell you, I'm nonpartisan. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. But when all else was failing, we thought that if we show Washington, D.C. and the White House how bad Skid Row is, we'll get some help from outside. We'll get a FEMA-like response to this FEMA-like disaster. So we aimed this video right at the president on Fox News. And I heard from his associates that they were talking to him about something else, but he saw us giving a tour on Skid Row, how bad it was. And he told them, leave me alone. I'm watching this. I'm interested in this. And he watched the video. The next day or so, I had 4 men from the White House show up in my office. Then I had 15 people come from the White House. Every cabinet was represented. I took them on a tour of Skid Row, and it was funny. Everybody on Skid Row knew who they were and where they came from. One handsome black man offered them an Obama phone as they went by, and I gave him a fist bump because he was really funny and witty. But after that, there was a proposal. They were going to bring all kinds of resources, all kinds of land, much like the settlement I described to you. Yeah. And they were going to provide it to the Salvation Army, to the Dream Center, to Union Rescue Mission, to immediately put up sprung structures in triage tents and get people immediately off the streets. Well, I had the head of the homelessness position in the White House in my office, and he told me not to say this, but I'll say it anyway, because he's not in office anymore. He said when they met with all of our city councilmen and they met with all of our county supervisors, they were told, except by one county supervisor, if any of these groups receive any of your funding, they have to de-faith and they have to de-recovery. So even though $2.6 billion came from the White House to LA, based on that video and bringing the president and Ben Carson here, we received none of it because of our position of working for recovery.
Right.
So if you want to know what's wrong on the streets, the same thing is wrong on the streets, is in the housing. And we need a recovery movement. As you know, Brian, we need shared housing for recovery. We need addiction help. We need mental health help. And none of that is coming. Everybody feels like housing is enough. I was on Fox, was it Fox or somewhere the other night. If housing is all we need, let me tell you, here's what I said. $1 billion, I couldn't do the math real quick on the governor's 12 billion, but I said $1 billion would provide you 120 million to buy and develop the land. And you could put 15,000 brand new 3-bedroom, 2-bath mobile homes on the land for 45,000 bedrooms. Well, I should have done the math because 12 billion would give you 1.2 billion to buy and develop land. And the rest of the money could be spent on 180,000 brand new 3-bedroom, 2-bath mobile homes for a total of 540,000 units of housing. If it's housing we need, why don't they do that? But it's not just housing they need. Whether the addiction led to your homelessness, whether the mental health led to your homelessness, or whether you picked it up on the streets because you're living in hell and you want to escape it, and you use drugs available to help you escape it, and you can't take the sleeplessness and everything else that comes on the streets, the rapes and all the horror, and you then have mental health. Whether it came first or second, you've got to have mental health and addiction recovery if we're ever going to solve this crisis. And that is not what's happening.
Dr. Sharin yesterday was on the Pacific Palisades Zoom meeting and said exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's a housing issue, but it's the other stuff that has to be done. You know, Venice's big concern now that the numbers have gone to 3,000 compared to the 4,000 or 5,000 that you have down there. We're second only to you. The move has always been that it's a containment zone down there. And the containment zone, they're building these 100-unit permanent supportive housing buildings right dead center in the middle of your neighborhood.
Right.
Venice is extremely concerned that it has now kind of been targeted as the containment zone for the West. And the majority of the permanent supportive housing that's being earmarked for the West Side is all being earmarked into Venice. Can you tell us what your feelings are when a 100-unit building goes up on the corner of 5th and San Pedro and you have 100 people there, but then you go to the San Julian Park and the majority of those people that are in the park are the ones that live in these permanent supportive housing buildings? And then in actuality, there's predators all around them to get them back in. And so they can't really recover in an area like yours. And I don't necessarily think they can recover in an area like Venice.
Right. Yeah.
Your thoughts
exactly
on that?
And that's why I say decentralize services, right? Regionalize services throughout LA County. That's always been our hope. So when you continue to put more high-rise buildings on Skid Row, you continue the corralling and containment policy, right? And so judge's injunction, I even tipped off the lawyers and the judge, hey, whatever housing we do, 60% of it has to be outside of Skid Row. Otherwise, we're just going to continue the corralling and containment policy. And so, yeah, I'd be alarmed. And I want to tell you, I'm not usually this tough, but you all need to be as organized as the most organized and activist, aggressive activists, because there's nothing they won't do. I mean, nothing will hold them back. I had one of them post on Facebook when I posted the video about how dangerous Venice is getting. Yeah. They said, why don't we just start moving in the empty houses? All will hurt is those greedy landlords. That's the attitude of the most extreme activists. And there's nothing that's going to hold them back except you all being organized and standing up for common sense. And I also wanted to add to you, whatever Santa Monica is doing right, you'd better learn from them and get your city councilman and others to at least do what Santa Monica is doing. I saw the stark difference. You ride down the bike trail from Santa Monica. When you hit Venice, it is absolute chaos and violence. And that's gotta stop. Or, you know, if I were you, I wouldn't just connect with the lawyer that I'm going to send you. I'd do whatever it takes to keep, and I never worry about your property value. When ladies from church would yell at me about addressing homelessness and they'd say my property value is going to drop, I said, well, that isn't going to matter in heaven. But for all of you, I know that some people are losing 500,000. I just want to give it one more mention about the activists and their attitudes. So I have a peer who runs one of the biggest housing organizations, and she admitted how concerned she is for her teammates, her staff. She had a staff murdered in downtown Skid Row, shot and murdered. And that has forever traumatized. I understand. She allowed herself to say, I'm worried about my staff. I'm worried about my guests. I'm worried that they can't even come to work and be safe. I'm worried that the biggest inventory of our buildings are all on Skid Row. And I think what I would say is, I don't know if we can stay on Skid Row if the judge's order doesn't pass. I don't know if it gets any worse. I don't know. We might, I mean, I've offered to just have our presence be me in a double-decker bus picking people up who want to escape and go somewhere else. That's how bad it's going to get on Skid Row if it doesn't get stopped. And everybody in the room, the other peers, my other peers who run housing organizations, they all belittled this lady for admitting her fear for her guests and her team. That's how nonsensical activists some of these folks are.
And you know, we've talked about shared housing. Why isn't the city using that model? I mean, there's Haven, there's shared collaborative housing. You've been a friend of that and a proponent. Why aren't they using that? And who's against that? Is it because there's not enough money in that game?
You know, I haven't gotten that cynical to think it's not that there's not enough money, but perhaps that's it. There is just no interest in recovery. I can understand sometimes why people think it's okay to obscure homelessness and just put somebody under a roof and kind of hide it and not have hope that in life transformation. But you and I know better than that. Yeah, exactly. We know people who are addicted can turn their life around and become one of your stellar employees, right? They can become employee of the year, employee of the month. They can have hope and turn their life around. Maybe it's just the fact that our city and our county doesn't believe in that kind of life recovery and life transformation. And so they just think it's okay to allow somebody to be in the death spiral of addiction of the harm reduction model. Maybe, you know, at times you scratch your head and say, am I crazy for believing that people can make a comeback? But then I look around at my teammates who've made a comeback and I continue to believe. It's the reason I go to work every day. People can turn their lives around, but as you said, they can't turn their life around in a completely chaotic, drunken. I had a guy run out of, I'm with Hal Eisner walking down the streets of Skid Row. A guy ran out of one of the buildings, the permanent supportive housing. He said, who are you guys? And we told him, he says, if you want to do something, why don't you stop the drug gangs from moving in, kicking people out of the apartment and taking over people's apartments? And all I did was tweet that, Brian. Yeah. I just tweeted what I saw, right? Very exact words. I had the activists who I mentioned earlier attack me on Twitter for demonizing gang members. Then I had a gang member across the street selling drugs come over and tell our guy on the dock, tell your boss to shut up about us. Mm-hmm. So then I called the commander of the police force. They sent over their policemen to watch the drug dealers across the street. And they not only busted the drug dealers, but they caught their supply person. And that's the truth about some of the activists on Skid Row who want to keep Skid Row. And I'm telling you, that's some of the activists that you're up against, right, who are trying to push you farther than you will ever want to go.
It's interesting that they're all over Venice yelling at the neighbors saying, not in my backyard, but no one's being an activist in Santa Monica or the other areas to say, hey, take your share. Anyway, Andy, thank you for this first 30 minutes. I kind of got to ask personal questions with you, and I do appreciate it. What I'd really like to do the next 30 minutes is to open it up, or 15 or 20 minutes with just our committee that's on this screen right now, to ask them to ask you a question or two. And then again, Andy, if there's time at the end of this, you know, we're going to have a lot of people from our community that would like to maybe ask a question. We might maybe ask 10 of them on the first 10 people to do it. If you have time to stay and answer those. But right now, let's just do the 30 minutes with our committee. And Vicki, why don't you see, or whoever wants to go first, how do we want to do this? Pat?
Well, I was listening as much as the distractions here in Venice would allow. And one of the things that kind of popped in mind
Can you tell
as I was
who you
hearing
are?
some of the things, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you tell Andy who you are? Andy, Pat is a one of our unsheltered guests in Venice, and we brought him onto this committee to speak through the eyes and ears of the people that are on the street. So I just wanted you to know the question and the context that might come from Pat.
Yes. So it seemed that the committee was functioning in a way that was not within the conversation. It was from outside in, and one of the things that I keep hearing about how a lot of the options that are available to people, the reason people don't access them is there is a measure of infantilization, right? And then there's people who want recovery, but there isn't enough room in the recovery house, right? So either you get treated like a child, whether you need it or not, right? Or when you need it, there's not a bed available because those resources are super slim, right? I wanted to kind of get a sense of how does that dynamic because you say activists, right? I'm trying to figure out how does that dynamic give the activists, as it is being defined, how you're saying it, some of the steam behind what they're doing, because they're saying that a lot of times the problem isn't being solved by the system that only has those two options, and people aren't going to go to it. So if people aren't going to go to it, how do we maintain a measure of dignity for the people who are there, right? And it seems like a lot of the activists, that's what's driving their thinking. So I wanted to kind of get a sense of who are these activists, as far as how you're seeing it, and what population do they come from? Are they house people who want to help and then come out and then lead the conversation? Or are these unhoused folks, or are these entrenched homeless? What does that mean, activists?
Let me agree with you first. There are not nearly enough options or beds. LA is on its own in that regard. So New York City has more people devastated by homelessness than Los Angeles, and they only have 4% of the people without a bed on the streets. There's a rule in New York that if you want a bed, you get a bed. And there's also one, if you're on the streets and it's 32 degrees, you have to come in. And let me tell you, LA leaves 75% of the people on the streets. And if everybody came in at once, we could only house 25%. So New York, 96%, even though they have more people who are homeless, 96% have a roof over their heads. In LA, 75% do not have a roof over their heads of any kind. So there are not enough options. There are not sober options, very few, except for Brian and his share program, a few others. It's an absolute disaster. And let me point out that, yes, the activist that I'm talking about right now is well off, but portrays that he represents the people of color on Skid Row who do not have a roof over their heads. He's the guy who I said his wife just received, her nonprofit received $7.5 million development fee. He's not representative of the people he says he's representative, and yet he's going after the judge. He's going after anybody who's trying to do something. He rules them out if they happen to be white like me and still care about people who are devastated on the streets and dying. And also it's the activists who think that harm reduction is the only way, where alcohol and drugs flow freely, who say that I'm demonizing gang members when they receive cheap meth from the cartels and then they distribute that cheap meth from the cartels and back it up with severe violence. I pulled out of my parking lot. So here's an extreme example of harm reduction. What does it mean? Does that mean you can't stop the drug dealer as he comes in your door to distribute drugs? Does that mean you can't tell him that his 6'6", 400-pound friend that's with him that's going to break everybody's bones for owing debt? I pulled out of my parking ramp, and a biggest human being I've ever seen in my life was beating on a woman. I rolled down my window. I said, "Stop beating on a woman." And he said, "She owes us money." You help me translate that. What does that mean? She owes us money. What does that mean?
Prostitution, sex trafficking, drugs, etc.
Well, what it means is she owes the gang money, right? But what happened is, so I said, "No reason to beat on a woman. Stop." He was at my window trying to hit me before I could get the words out. He was faster than Najee from Green Bay. And my security guards poured out of the building, 8 of them. He crossed the street and took his coat off. And I said, "I think we're outnumbered." And he ended up leaving. But the truth was, her boyfriend owed the drug gang money, and he was taking it out. See, that's why I think policymakers, they've never been on the street. They've never experienced what their silly harm reduction policy brings about. And that is pervasive downtown in Skid Row, in all of the permanent supportive housing. That's pervasive anywhere there's that harm reduction model. I'm peers with the people that are in charge of the harm reduction model being carried out in LA. They admit to me the chaos, the confusion, the battle, the difficulty that they're in every day in those units, not only with people overdose and dying, but in battles with a gang member put out a cigarette at the permanent supportive housing next door to Union Rescue Mission, put the cigarette out on one of their employees. Yeah. I said, "Hey, you tell them to call me if that ever happens again." Can you imagine the fear of working in that environment and having cigarettes put out by gang members on your employees? What message that sends? That's the message that illegal behavior is getting, not only inside but outside on our streets from our legal authorities.
And you saw, based on the videos we sent you, that's what's happening on the streets and on the boardwalk in Venice. We witnessed the crime, we witnessed the abuse, we witnessed the fighting, we witnessed the fires, and our hands are tied. And
the gangs collect rent on Skid Row from people even being able to use that space for their tent. And if you drive by and you see somebody's tent tossed out in the street and all their belongings, that's called an eviction on Skid Row. And I saw it in the videos in Venice. And the extreme form of eviction is lighting your tent on fire while you're in there. And yet here's this group of, boy, I don't want to use that word. Here's this group of young, naive people who think Skid Row is just this beautiful community of people caring about each other, and Venice is this beautiful community of people caring about each other, where you get evicted by having your tent lit on fire, and where a person who's worked there for 40 years gets made fun of because they're starting to be concerned about the health and well-being of their staff and their guests. And as I called tonight, I'm concerned about you alls. Yeah. Well, I'm concerned about the lady and the husband who spoke up, right? We shouldn't be left in this position. You shouldn't be left in this position.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me a lot of times like the Twitter dynamic is going on. So the people who are loudest and most vocal and organized in their approach often drives the conversation, even though the common sense dialogue that's happening on the ground and the solutions that people are coming up with on the ground never becomes heard, because it's being drowned out by voices that feel that it's a team thing, right? So once you are on my team, you can't say or do anything against my team, even if my team is causing the problem to become worse. So
You're right. You're so wise. No, I've been totally ostracized. Brian called me a treasure of LA, but I've been ostracized. The rest of the missions and agencies, they're having meetings without me. They're ganging up on me along with some of the activists, and because I've been for the judge, I've been ostracized. I'm not on the team anymore, but it doesn't bother me. I'm going to keep speaking up because we cannot allow a few very loud people who think they represent it all to destroy our city for both our people devastated by homelessness and our housed people. We can't allow the most precious thing we have, human beings, to continue to suffer and die on the streets. 5 people died yesterday on the streets of LA. 5 people will die today. 5 people will die tomorrow. And I'm going against organizations that are saying, but organizations will suffer if we change priorities. And, our plan will change. Let me tell you the truth about permanent supportive housing and Measure HHH. It was supposed to build 10,000 units out of 50,000 people devastated by homelessness. It was only a 1/5 proposition at best. Well, then that 10,000 became 5,200 because of rising costs. In reality, we've gotten 707 of those units done in 4.5 years, while 5,817 people have died on the streets. It's an absolute disaster. And the judge was trying to intervene in that disaster. And everybody who has money in it, and city council and others who are getting kickbacks, and developers who are getting kickbacks, they're all up in arms because they want to keep the deadly status quo.
I hear you. Committee members, who's next? Vicky, Stan, Michael, Liz? Chime in, somebody.
I'm prepared.
Thanks, Michael. Meet Andy Bales.
Yeah. Good evening, Reverend Bales. My name is Michael Rapkin. I'm a member of the Venice Council's Homeless Committee. Just want to ask you a few questions. In particular, regarding the LA Alliance lawsuit, the crux of that injunction was to get the thousands of Skid Row unhoused people off the streets and into shelter, correct?
Well, they started out all of LA, right? I mean, they wanted to get all of LA people without homes to have a roof over their heads. But then they figured out, hey, the worst part of this is that LA specifically targeted corralling and containing, especially people of color, and putting them on the 53 square blocks of Skid Row, and then have continued that policy. And so they thought the best way to win in one area, which would hopefully help them win in all areas, was to focus in on Skid Row first. And that's why they focused in on Skid Row. That came later.
You have a follow-up, Mike?
Mike?
Gotcha. Yeah, so
You're frozen, Michael.
in essence, the goal here, yeah, I'm sorry, here in Mexico. Can you hear me now?
Yes, a little bit.
Start again.
Do you hear me?
You're popping in and out, Mike.
I'll be very quick.
You want
The
to
bottom line is that
He faded out on us.
Maybe you could chat it.
We'll bring him back. Maybe
Yeah, maybe we could go to some audience questions, and then come back, depending on how much time we have. I know that there's several people who really wanted to talk. Demetrios.
do you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Now we can. Can you reboot and come back into the
Reverend, the bottom line is that what Union Rescue Mission does is to shelter people. Judge Carter's order is to get people sheltered. And so you agree that it's better to shelter people than to have them live on the street. Is that correct?
Yeah, but again, I've attacked those
Okay.
I've attacked those activists because they set up a straw man argument. The injunction by the judge says shelter and house people immediately, and he did not rule out mobile homes or container homes or 3D printed concrete homes or other kinds of innovative immediate housing. What he ruled out was he's tired of the slow to develop, very expensive
Right.
units.
So my final question is simply this. Would it not be better for the residents of Venice and all of CD11 to move people from the sidewalks into shelters or shared housing?
Absolutely. Any
for
kind
mental
of,
health and addiction
kind
recovery and mobile homes? Yes.
absolutely. A roof of any kind immediately
Thank you.
over the
I
heads
appreciate it.
of people with mental health and recovery support. That was
Brian, I'm finished.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Michael. Thanks, Andy.
I
Go
have
ahead.
a quick question.
I'm done.
Thank you. I don't know what the percentage is on Skid Row of people who are not so much service resistant, but here for the drugs. I mean, we have a lot of kids down on the beach who are very young and they're here for the party. And that's a pretty large percentage right now. Do you have that on Skid Row? And if you do, how is it dealt with?
Yeah, we do. And right now it's not dealt with at all. It's Commander Andy Smith called it Mardi Gras on crack. Now it's Mardi Gras on meth and fentanyl. The police have backed off. Why try when they pick up somebody for a very violent crime and they see him an hour later? And I don't know. I'm not there, but is that what you see in Venice? Have the police just backed off from the chaos and gotten out of the way?
Yeah, in many cases right now, when you call in a 911 call, one of the first questions you're asked is, does this involve an unhoused person? And if it does, everything changes. And that started after the defunding and City Hall and Mike Fuhrer pretty much pulled them back from enforcing a lot.
Yeah, and see, I think that's the biggest difference between Santa Monica and Venice right now. It sounds like Santa Monica still has authority in the public parks and meeting places, and they set out a multidisciplinary team immediately to address a situation involving a person devastated by homelessness. And it looks to me like that is not happening at all in Venice with what I saw from the videos and even what I've seen in the past personally. But the minimum you should ask for is what Santa Monica is getting. And I would not give up until you get that kind of a response. And I'm encouraging you to connect with the lawyer that we're working with, because he will assist you in stepping up and asking for the county and the city to provide a level of compassion and care that will hopefully bring an answer to Venice, like it's hopefully going to bring to Skid Row. But I can tell you, if the judge's orders aren't listened to and there's no settlement, we're so far past the tipping point in Skid Row. Honestly, even the single room occupancy and other agencies are going to try to do all their housing outside of Skid Row from now on. They can't risk their staff and their liability by hanging out there. And like I said, I may be in a double-decker bus picking people up to take them somewhere because it's too risky to keep working in a place that is gone. I mean, but you all live there, so you can't be gone. You have to stand up for yourselves and be as organized and tough as you can be, all the while having compassion. It's so good. I heard tonight, I care about these people who are struggling out on these streets. but you know, I have a business here. I have my house here. You have every right to stand up for yourselves, to live a full life and not let that be taken away by aggressive tactics.
Vicky, can you ask a couple community?
Yes, I think so. First one up is Demetrios.
Hi, thank you very much. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Reverend Bales, the man, the
Demetrius.
myth, the legend. I've been trying to get with you, and thank you for joining tonight's meeting. I've been following your work, and I got your back. I think we all have your back. You have answers, you have solutions. You've been at the forefront of this for the longest time. It just blows my mind. And listening to you speak in the past, especially at the local community council meetings, you know, one thing that struck my head, and you addressed it, and Brian brought it up, but you know, the traditional pillars of getting people help, you know, with addiction, at least, with you know, recovery, faith and recovery, the 12 steps. I mean, it's always been what we had to adhere to. I mean, I'm a guy that's had my trouble with drugs and, you know, getting drunk and getting arrested. And every time I got in trouble, you know, I had to go to a program. I didn't like it. I hated it. And I didn't want to be there. But after bumping my head in the wall a few times, I finally started to soak in a little bit. And I was able to take some of that. And like, you know, I got tired of that. So I maybe had a little stronger will than the next guy. But we don't have that anymore. There's no more diversion. There's no more penalties, things that you couldn't do before. Now you can just get away with it. It almost seems like this is all by design, because, you know, if they're trying to help people, I mean, where's the compassion in letting people suffer on the streets? And then some are by choice, I get it. And some are, you know, have severe mental issues, or they're not taking their meds. And but if their families can't help them, and their friends have failed or tried to help them, you know, and they're just kind of like, how's the government going to fix this if they're not addressing the root of the problem? Nobody wants to address the root of the problem. You brought it up. You're faith-based in recovery, and you can't touch any of that HHH or H money. But on another note, have you had any interactions with Mike Bonin, our council member? He's a self-proclaimed recovery, you know, person, and it almost seems like whatever he did to get off the couch of whatever he was doing to get into career politics and rose up to the ranks, like, why isn't that not his personal message with how he's going to try to deal with it? And then I think, you know, to hear the activists, which they side with the activists, like their constituents are the activists, they're not the constituents anymore, which blows my mind. And the fear and intimidation for trying to, you know, call it what it is. And then I want to throw in, you know, Sheriff Villanueva, who came out on the weekend with the post saying that he's going to roll up his sleeves and start to do something that, you know, to try to put a dent in, or try to at least get people to housing or shelters to start the program. I don't know. And then he had a meeting with the West Coast rappers, and they're having dialogue, and it was like, you know, all these things are going on. So I know I'm going to cut off, but
we can't go 5 minutes on each question. So
I got it, guys. I'm sorry. I'm just so excited with that, Reverend Bales.
let Andy answer
Thank
what the best he can. Thanks.
Yes. So, you know, I know Mike Bonin as a guy who, at the same time, I was declaring how dangerous helping a few with very expensive, slow to develop units is, while at that time, Mike agreed with me, while leaving 29,000 on the streets. That was his words. He was quoting how many people in the city were on the streets at that time, and how what he said, we made a mistake 10 years ago when we went that way. We need to deal with the people who are on the street. 29,000 then, 50,000 last year. Now it's 70,000 in the county are on the streets. It's only going upward. And let me share with you, Demetrius, one other way I want to agree. I want to say, I believe Mike Bonin is truly wanting to help. When I showed up and spent the night at City Hall a couple years in a row, he showed up to encourage me, the only city councilman to show up and encourage me, because I was sending a statement. One year it was 41,000 on the streets, and 41,000 plus one, me on the streets, 44,000 plus one. I think his heart is good. I think LA has tied his hands so much. Courts have tied his hands so much. Police not responding have tied his hands so much. I'm not giving him excuses. I'm trying to say, at his heart, I know he's as upset about this mess as anyone is. And then what was the other deal I was going to respond to? Not that you shouldn't put pressure on Mike to respond just the way I said. The minimum of what you should get is Santa Monica's response, and you should keep the pressure on until you get that. But don't let Mike be pressured by those activists. Don't, as you said, don't let him just, be beholden to the activists. Speak up and demand what you all deserve: a safe, decent neighborhood. The other deal just came to me, doesn't answer you, Demetrius, because I kind of lost whatever I was going to say. You shouldn't criminalize homelessness, but you should criminalize criminal behavior in the encampments. That's the minimum we should expect from the police, is to criminalize criminal behavior. A very wise officer in Pomona says, hey, when we hear of crime in an encampment, we go out there because by chance, if we can arrest them for that crime, the ride back to jail, we might be able to say, hey, it's time to change your life. It's time to get into recovery. It's time to head home, wherever home is, to your family. It's a point of intervention. Well, if we're allowing violence and chaos to go on in our streets and in our encampments, and we're not taking the opportunity for an intervention and a life-saving move, shame on us and shame on everybody who's letting it go on. Those are opportunities to change somebody's life. And if we're just backing off because of our new LA County lawyer, attorney, or the police hesitancy to get involved because they arrest somebody and they get let out, well, shame on us if we're not using every opportunity to redirect somebody's life. And shame on us if we're letting people be beaten and robbed and raped on the streets and not intervening. We are our brother's keeper. That was the point of the question to Cain and Abel.
Vicky, call another.
Heidi.
Hello, Reverend Bales. My name is Heidi Roberts, and my husband and I founded Haven Shared Housing 3 years ago. And we were also the couple that was walking through Venice talking about the crisis.
Thank you.
But we were inspired by Share years ago. And because everybody was telling us that there was no housing, we said, well, we're going to create housing. So in the past 2 years, using our own dollars, we have housed almost 170 people with zero help from the city, county, or state. And unfortunately, I have to debate with you on Mike Bonin, zero support from him as well. In fact, he's been really detrimental to our program. A personal issue. So I feel like when I was listening to you tonight, it really struck me that we're fighting big tobacco. The lobbyists for the huge homeless services companies are like big tobacco. They're RJ Reynolds, co-opting the addiction and the misery simply to make a bunch of money. And they're taking advantage of the most vulnerable just simply to make money, and millions of dollars in reality. So I look at Venice Community Housing, who I know you were referring to earlier, and they're big tobacco, and the gangs are their bodyguards or their lawyers. The homeless are the cigarette smokers. And I'm not sure where we residents fit into this, but I know we're not doing well in the mix either. Maybe it's secondhand smoke that we're dying from. But I feel like the unhoused are the ones who are suffering the most, and at the expense of money, because it really does come down to money. And so how do we create awareness of this really gross and devastating reality that's being created and abetted by politicians and their donors? And how do we combine forces? And how do we help the people who are suffering and break through the stalemate of the dollars? And by the way, can we please have the name of your lawyer? Because my husband and I would love to join forces with you and the other shared housing organizations. Anyway, thank you. My minute's up.
Thank you.
I think you just answered your own question by speaking up and speaking the truth without fear and with great courage, and sharing your side. I try to put in editorials all the time of the LA Times, and they won't print it. They will not print mine because I don't agree with their housing first as the only solution. And so send it to San Gabriel Valley News. Just get the word out. Whoever will get your word out, and it's true. Everything you just said is very true. Everything you just said is very true. And it's hard to take on activists when they are funded by gang members, right? When they benefit from the drug trade going on, from cartels sending cheap meth in and then having it distributed by gangs. And then when you call out what's happening, they tell you you're demonizing gang members. I was so perplexed by, I'm demonizing people who sell drugs and beat on people and charge little ladies rent for where they put their, I think they demonize themselves with their behavior. But see, I'm a person of faith, so I think it's even bigger than big tobacco. It's it's the most evil force in the world, trying to destroy precious lives. And you're right, the people who are suffering are the ones who are struggling on the streets, and it's our job to save them from the streets and even from themselves. My Bible says that if you see somebody walking toward destruction and you don't intervene, God knows your heart and will remember what you did. So I'm compelled to do what I do, no matter what comes my way. I've lost my right leg from flesh-eating disease on the streets of Skid Row, from not enough restrooms and running into human waste that infected my right leg. And then I've lost my left leg now for trying to keep up with one leg. But nothing's going to stop me from continuing to try to save lives. Looking right now at buying 700 acres of property outside of LA to try to create a recovery town in honor of Tom Bradley, who tried to do it 30 some years ago. And I saw what he was doing, and I wrote him a congratulations letter, and he wrote me one back, even though I was a young guy in Des Moines, Iowa. But there are things we can all do together if we team up and still emphasize recovery. We can do the best we can do, despite, like, I said the other day that even though preachers have been preaching many years and people aren't yet doing right, it doesn't mean the preacher should quit preaching, because what he's preaching is right. If what you all are preaching is right, don't give up on it. It doesn't matter where the world goes. We've got to keep doing right.
Wow.
Andy, how are you doing on time? You got a couple more minutes for us?
I'm fine. Yeah,
Thank
I'm probably.
Let's take a couple more from the audience, and then I think
5 more minutes, and we get let. It's getting dark around you, Andy. So I don't. Thanks. Go ahead, Vicki.
Nick, you're up next.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. One of the hard costs is land acquisition, and the city seems to own thousands of acres of property. Why doesn't the city use eminent domain seizure to cut the cost of the hard costs and make building permanent housing a lot more reasonable? Secondly, the one thing I've also noticed that two organizations that don't seem to be in the homelessness equation are Habitat for Humanity and AA. And can you address the hard costs first, and then talk about why an organization like Habitat for Humanity doesn't have a homeless participation?
Yeah, so the city does have, they don't even need to do eminent domain. They have like 14,000 lots available, somewhere between 7,500 and 14,000 lots that they could make available for all kinds of innovative, affordable housing. Like I mentioned, 3D concrete, printed homes that can be put up in 24 to 48 hours for $10,000, container homes, mobile homes. They have, and they play favorites. They gave a group several $1 million worth of beach land for, what was it, 34 tiny homes that ended up costing $5.4 million, which means that's $138,000 per unit for a tiny home you can buy on Amazon for $7,000. So they play favorites. They gave the Downtown Women's Center their building for $1 lease, and now they're giving them the city-owned parking lot next door to build a high-rise apartment building next door. So they, even with Measure HHH, they didn't even put out an RFP request for proposals, they were already giving the land away to their favorites. I'm hoping that the judge's order to get an audit of Measure HHH and H comes quickly, because they have the land, they play favorites. I don't know why AA is so absent from the discussion. I think Habitat's probably doing the best they can do on a small voluntary scale. I may tell Habitat about this land if we're able to get it, and maybe have them help us develop a recovery community. But those are good questions. Where's Habitat in this, and where's AA? Because recovery, I don't know if we all in this room, big room, if we could start a recovery movement, but recovery certainly needs to be a movement. And right now it's a world that just believes, do what you want to do and get as high as you want to get. I guess the new definition by the stars, Demi Novato, she says the new definition of sober in California is just smoking marijuana and using mushrooms. That's the new definition of sober. So I think we definitely need to stick with the definition of sober and start a recovery movement.
Appreciate that. We haven't tried to do 12.
Before we take any more public comment, I know that both Frank and Stan Muhammad on the committee had questions. So let's go back to that in case Reverend Bales has to bail on us.
Yeah.
Well, I want to just say, I want to thank Brian first for bringing this dynamic human being to this much needed discussion. Reverend Bales, I don't know you, but I hear God, I hear Christ, I hear the passion. And I'm hoping after tonight, each one of us can take something from this spirit that he has and bring it into Venice. Because I have been on the front line as a recovering addict myself, as a former gang member out of Venice, someone who's been in Venice all his life, 4 generations in. And what he's speaking to is exactly what I see every day. I've been saying if we can build $1 million mansion next to these people, either they're going to turn the mansion out or they're going to end back out on the street so they can get high. So those of us who know about recovery, we don't care. Let me say it like this. When I was knee deep in my addiction, I didn't care who I was hurting. I didn't care if I had a bed. I didn't care about, all I cared about was getting high. So this movement that he's speaking about, dealing with recovery, I think that's what we should be really focusing on in Venice, because that's really the problem, is recovery. We have to start this conversation. So as it relates to the gang stuff around encampments, yeah, that's happening. As it relates to people taking advantage of those who is in the tents, yes, all that's happening. And the concern that I'm having is a lot of people afraid to even have this type of conversation. So I'm hoping we can pull from this energy tonight, committee members and those who's listening, and really wrap our minds around everything that the Reverend is telling us tonight, because I don't think it's the Reverend speaking. I think this is God speaking to us through him, whether we want to see him as our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, whether we want to see him as Moses or Muhammad or whatever your faith is. God is speaking through this man tonight. So I just wanted to commend you for your work. Venice has definitely have gotten completely out of control. And what disturbs me is we got millions of dollars coming in for housing, but the people is still on the streets. Even right across the street from the new campus on Main and Sunset, I believe, we have tents right across the street. And it's like, do these people that work there even realize what's happening? Do they even see this? So thank you, Reverend, for being with us tonight. It's an honor, man, to be able to hear you. And I'm taking every word that you're saying is resonating with my soul. So thank you very much for being on with us tonight.
What was your name again?
My name is Stan Muhammad. I'm the executive director of the Helper Foundation. We are one of the funded agencies through the Gang Reduction Youth Development. out of the mayor's office. We are the agency that's responsible for a non-aggression agreement in the city of Venice between the Black and Brown gang. I have been asked to be a part of this committee, and I'm on this committee. But at the end of the day, everything that you're saying, man, is resonating in my soul. So this stuff that you're talking tonight is going to keep me up, because if we don't start having this conversation in Venice, we're not going to see any systemic change as it relates to the unhoused in Venice. It's going to get worse. So thank you.
I think that movement could start with you, from what you shared, and I'll be praying for you.
Thank you.
He does that work, Reverend. He does that work every day. Frank, did you have anything? We're going to wrap this up in a couple minutes. I got to let
we're sorry, Andrew Bales, we're losing you. You're fading into the background. Apologize.
It's okay, Andy.
Two questions. One is FEMA-like disaster. Why isn't, I've asked loss of this, I've asked several other organizations, why isn't 60,000 people, 5 people dying a day, a state of emergency? And then the second thing is, we have a housing issue, and I know that we want to separate housing from homelessness, or at least that's to some degree what's happening. And but we've had a housing almost institutionally made scarce over time. And there seems to be an immediate need, a middle need, and a long-term need. And they all have to line up together. And it doesn't seem like, it seems like there's a lot of focus on that immediate, which is absolutely necessary. But there doesn't seem to be anything going on in the long-term sector as I see it. In all the data that I've mined.
No immediacy on any level. There's no immediacy. There's no urgency. As I said, 707 units in 4.5 years, while 5,817 people have died on the streets. An aversion to doing immediate shelter, an aversion to doing FEMA trailers. There's no urgency whatsoever with our leaders. I heard from somebody I can trust that our city council and our county supervisors, perhaps save one, are more worried about where they're going next than they're worried about doing their job. I can't fathom that. I don't know if that's celebrity or what that is, but usually you get somewhere else by doing a good job where you are. And for some reason, that's not our leaders. Our leaders are focused on where they're going to be next instead of doing a good job now. There's no urgency on any level of any of that housing.
Thank you very much for sharing all this with us tonight.
Andy, thank you, my friend. Meeting the call that so quickly, your generosity of your time and your knowledge. I just thank you on behalf of our entire committee and our entire community. We want to follow up with you and get your inside information as far as the people that can help us. And again, thank you to everybody in Venice that participated tonight. And God bless, my friend. We'll be in touch shortly.
I'll send you that information as long as you promise to share it with all, Brian.
I will share it with all. And,
all right.
And we'll do that. God bless, my friend. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't know if you